That's right, it's your boy. Today, we are creating one of the most busted builds in the entire game and also one of the coolest. That's right, we are creating the Death Knight. I'm a strong advocate for not going completely min-max on your characters all the time, but I accidentally made this build completely OP when I was role-playing a Death Knight, so I'm here to share the experience. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe for more, and I will show the full build path on screen right now in case you don't have time to watch the full video, and to further entice you to destroy that subscribe button. Do it. Hit the button. As I make BG3 content all the time and would love to have you around, so hit the bell as well and let me know down in the comments what you liked about the build or what you want to see next. Welcome to Purge Evil. Thank you for stopping by. Let's get into it. Level 1. There are several ways to go about building the infamous Death Knight, but for this version, we will mainly be using Warlock and Paladin, with an extra 2 levels that we can dip into something else later if we deem so necessary. Today's Death Knight is going to focus on just completely annihilating everything in his path with no regard for human or tiefling life in an endless search for more power. And for that reason, I will begin our video by immediately going into Oathbreaker. I suggest taking Vengeance Paladin when you make your character, and you can check out my Vengeance Paladin build for an overview of that subclass before you make your decision to break your oath. Link in the description. Now, just before we actually get into it, make sure your fighting style is for great weapons and your abilities are something like Strength 16, Dexterity 10, Constitution 14, Intelligence 8, Wisdom 8, and Charisma 17. Make sure you get the Hag's hair as early as possible, and definitely make sure to get the Hag's eye to look badass. The best race is obviously the human, and if you disagree, you're wrong. Take Perception with the extra skill and take Intimidation and Insight for your other ones. Also, go crazy with the Lithid powers and make sure you pass all the dice rolls at the Zaithis so you can use those powers as bonus actions. This Death Knight is more of a subjugator rather than a necromancer, so if you want an Army of the Dead necromancer version of the Death Knight, let me know down in the comments. With that being said, make sure you get the Dance Macabre Fiends from the Necromancy of Thay for ultimate flavor. The other permanent companions are cool to have as well, but you 100% have to get the 4 fiends. At level 1, the Oathbreaker gets Spiteful Suffering. I'm gonna be honest, you're rarely gonna use this unless you're able to perform another action using haste or by some other means. The reason being, this seems to be a lackluster ability that takes your main action point to use and a channel oath charge. Spiteful Suffering does 1d4 plus your charisma modifier necrotic damage each turn for 3 turns, and attack rolls against it have advantage, which is actually super useful. The problem is, as I stated before, it uses your main action, so 9 times out of 10 you're gonna be better off attacking or using something more useful. And we'll have plenty of ways to gain advantage on our opponents anyways very shortly. Opening up combat using this on your first turn might be the only best time to really use it. Level 2. At level 2, we'll unlock our smites. Make sure you equip all 3 and check your reaction boxes for your divine smites. Command is my next favorite spell to have, and then you can either prepare divine favor or heroism. The main smite you're going to use, besides divine smites, which proc whenever you land a regular attack, is going to be Thunderous Smite. This is insanely busted because it not only deals heavy damage plus thunder, it knocks your opponent prone, and we all know how abusive we are towards this mechanic. Again, if you want a more in-depth explanation of the regular paladin abilities, make sure to visit my Vengeance Paladin build, link in the description. I promise I will only plug it like one more time. Level 3. Now at level 3, you're gonna have to make your biggest decision of the entire build. At this point, we've Oathbreaking, so we can no longer respec without going through the motion. So you have a couple options. Option A, which is my preferred option, is to immediately spec into Warlock so we can gain much needed passives and abilities to completely bust our build as early as possible. Or option B, continue Paladin to level 5 so you can get extra attack and then start multi-classing into Warlock. Option A sees us getting extra attack at level 7, which is just fine in my opinion for the trade-off of abilities we gain. So going with option A, we now spec into Warlock, and you can take either the Fiend or the Great Old One. The clips you're gonna see are gonna be of a Death Knight using the Fiend, but I can argue for you to actually take the Great Old One, specifically because when you land a critical, you frighten the target and nearby enemies, which is just absolutely main character for a Death Knight and actually pretty busted, and I think it fits pretty well. Taking the Fiend will grant you temporary hit points after killing an enemy, which is always nice, but the best argument for taking Fiend is gonna be Fireball, the most insanely busted spell in the entire game. For the purposes of this video, we're gonna take the Fiend. Dark One's Blessing is the passive that grants us temporary hit points upon a kill equal to our charisma modifier plus our warlock level. For our two cantrips, you already know we're taking Eldritch Blast, the strongest cantrip in the entire game, and Friends to make all of our charisma checks just that much easier by giving us advantage. Do not get Hellish Rebuke, as we will get this from the Oathbreaker subclass. For our two spells, we shall take Arms of Hadar and Hex. If you took the Great Old One subclass, I highly recommend taking Armor of Agathis here. The reason we won't take it using the Fiend is because the temporary hit points granted from each ability do not stack, and I like having more spell slots for smites and spells. Instead, consider replacing something for Armor of Agathis once we unlock level 3 spells, as the buff from the spell would be much stronger than the buff from the Fiend at that point. Please keep in mind that we also will have access to Hunger of Hadar, another spell that I'll recommend you replace something for at level 5 Warlock due to how busted it can be. Remember that you can only replace one spell per level up. Arms of Hadar is perfect for the Death Knight, as he will always be in the enemy's face and likely will be surrounded a majority of the game. This is an AoE that does 2d6 necrotic damage in a 3-meter radius. It also applies a condition that prevents enemies from taking reactions, in case you need to move away without getting opportunity attacked. Hex will simply be treated as if it were Hunter's Mark, but it will instead deal an extra 1d6 necrotic damage with our attacks. The ability you actually hex has little to no effect in combat, so don't worry too much about it. Level 4. Moving on to level 4 Warlock 2, we get another Warlock spell slot and a new spell that will be Burning Hands. I like this because it is a conical AoE type of spell that does 3d6 fire damage to each target caught within the blast. This isn't going to be your go-to move, but it can be very useful if there's multiple enemies in front of you, and can even be used kinda like a cleave in that sense to finish multiple enemies all at once. Plus, it's some pretty cool flavor, seeing as our Death Knight has an endless lust for power and for sure would harness fire. Next, we have our Eldritch Invocations, which of course will be Agonizing Blast, adding our charisma modifier to the damage that each beam from Eldritch Blast does, and Devil's Sight, which now allows the Death Knight to see in magical and non-magical darkness. You already know what's coming at level 5. Here we take Warlock 3, upgrading our Warlock spells to level 2 spell slots, and now we will unlock Darkness. Absolutely one of the most busted spells to abuse, as you can essentially lock down an entire area to yourself, giving you advantage on every enemy within the darkness, as they will all be blinded, which also means they'll hardly be able to even hit you. Not to mention, ranged attacks cannot penetrate the darkness. But since the Death Knight has Devil's Sight, he can easily peer through the darkness and send an Eldritch Blast down range. This is one of my favorite spells to use, and I recommend having your other party members be able to utilize it as well to synergize best with their obvious leader, the Death Knight. At level 5 Oathbreaker, we will automatically unlock Darkness as an always prepared spell, so consider replacing this version of Darkness with something else. You'll have to do this by Warlock 5, as again, you can only replace spells on level up, and we cannot respect being an Oathbreaker, so do make note that you'll be without Darkness for a few levels, although one of your party members should be able to pick up that slack. For our Pact boon, we will obviously take Pact of the Blade, and ignore the ability of the same name because we will only be using Bind Pact Weapon. This binds your weapon, meaning it can't be dropped, but it also now completely utilizes your charisma for damage instead of strength. At this point, if you haven't broken your oath and don't have the stats I recommended, take this time to respec your strength down to 14 and boost your charisma to 17. Otherwise, if you already had your charisma at 17, add the extra points into your dex. Level 6. Moving on to level 6 Warlock 4, we get our first feat, which of course will be Great Weapon Master. Definitely the best feat in the game for a two-handed user. First, when landing a critical or killing an enemy, you can make another attack using a bonus action. Second, we now have a passive that can be toggled on and off, which reduces our attack rolls by 5, but gives us a plus 10 damage bonus in return, which is a huge trade-off and will make our attacks hit incredibly hard. Remember, if you don't have a high enough chance to hit, you can toggle this passive off and your attacks will roll like normal. We get another spell and cantrip, and you can take any cantrip you like, but I'll take Poison Spray to fit the theme of the Death Knight because he's still partially decayed, right? And for the spell, I like to take Misty Step, especially since we won't be getting it from the Vengeance Paladin. Consider replacing one of your spells with Armor of Agathis for reasons I stated earlier. Level 7. Here at level 7 and our final necessary level into Warlock, our Warlock spells are now upgraded to level 3 spells, and we unlock some more good stuff. First, we now have Deep Impact Extra Attack, simply allowing for a follow-up attack after your first, a spell, and another Eldritch Invocation. For our spell, we obviously have to take Fireball, arguably the best damage spell in the entire game. This is a huge AoE on impact spell that does 8d6 fire damage with a 4-meter blast radius. The Death Knight is the most powerful fighter at all times on the battlefield, so it's no wonder he'd go out of his way to learn to use this spell. For the invocation, the best one would probably be Repelling Blast. When you hit an enemy with the beam from your Eldritch Blast, they'll now be knocked back 4.5 meters, so either get the fuck off me or send them into the chasm. This can be toggled on and off. At this point in the game, you're gonna be so overpowered you could probably just stop leveling and go fight the Absolute in a 1v1 on Rust and come out untouched. I'm not even joking when I say this. I accidentally made this build on my first Evil playthrough, and it was absolutely ridiculous the amount of damage I was dealing around this time. Consider replacing Darkness with Hunger of Hadar for reasons I stated earlier. Level 8. At level 8, we finally move back into Paladin, gaining another regular level 1 spell slot, and you can prepare any spell here as we're not going to be using them much if at all. Being a level 3 Oathbreaker, we now have Hellish Rebuke and Inflict Wounds always prepared, which are both decent spells in their own right. Hellish Rebuke is a reaction spell that you're able to activate when an enemy hits you and retaliates, dealing 2d10 fire damage, and they will still take half damage if they pass the dexterity saving throw. Inflict Wounds is actually a fairly heavy hitting melee spell that deals 3d10 necrotic damage, and while most of our damage is going to come from our melee attacks, it can be fun to sometimes dip into the Death Knight's disgusting and vile power. Adding to our build's theme, we also gain 2 Channel Oath abilities, being Control Undead and Dreadful Aspect, further devolving the Paladin into a true Death Knight. With Control Undead, we can now dominate and control an undead creature, effectively adding another body to our party, as the undead will follow the Death Knight around and attack his enemies, lasting until long rest. This ability is the best argument I have for taking your Paladin 5 levels first before taking Warlock, so that you'll have this ability for the entirety of Act 2, which is swarmed with undead. Dreadful Aspect is a very useful ability, as the Death Knight unleashes his darkest emotions to frighten enemies within a 9-meter radius around him. Frighten comes with a Wisdom saving throw and will cause the affected creature to have disadvantage on ability checks and attack rolls, and also cannot move. This can last for 10 turns. Level 9. Moving on, we take Paladin 4 and get another Lay on Hands charge in our next feat. Make sure to quickly take ability improvement to cap your charisma at 20. Level 10. Level 10 will be Paladin 5, which will be the last mandatory level for this build, as you have been completely overpowered for a while at this point, and anything else added to this build is just gonna be cherries. Here, we get another level 1 spell slot and 2 level 2 spell slots, along with our second extra attack, allowing the Death Knight to literally annihilate anything he sees in 1 turn with 3 attacks, 4 if you include the bonus action from Great Weapon Master. You also have access to level 2 Paladin spells, which you can either prepare Branding Smite, Bless, or Lesser Restoration. Level 11 and 12. For the last 2 levels of this build, I do not have a specific path to take, but I will share with you what I did for my Death Knight and some other possible options you could take as well. But honestly, there are many different paths you could take, and none of them would be wrong. For me, I wanted as many attacks as possible all the time. I also took a bit of a different path through the levels than what I recommended throughout this video. The reason I didn't include it was just because it wasn't optimal at all. But anyways, I multi-classed yet again into Cleric. That's right, my friends, the best class in the entire game, the Cleric. It was a no-brainer for me, as I didn't care about anything but getting the War Domains, Priest Charge, bonus action extra attack. I'm not gonna bother explaining any of the cleric spells this comes with, as you won't be using them anyways. If you've made a weapon attack on your turn, you can then make an extra attack using your bonus action and a priest charge. So even if you don't land a critical or kill an enemy with the Great Weapon Master feat, you can still make that extra bonus attack. The priest charges recharge on long rest, of course. Taking another level into War Domain Cleric will grant you a Channel Divinity charge and 2 abilities to use it with, being Turn Undead and Guided Strike. The main reason for taking this level. Guided Strike will prompt when you make an attack that misses and will add a +10 bonus to your attack roll, heavily increasing the chance for you to land that hit, probably never missing again. Take Talos as your deity for sick dialogue options. Some other options are Warlock 6 for Dark One's own luck, but that isn't really necessary with the Death Knight's insane charisma and his party members to buff him as well. 2 more levels into Paladin would grant you 2 auras, protection and hate, the first giving you and your allies a bonus to saving throws equal to your charisma modifier, and the second grants you and nearby fiends and undead additional attack damage equal to your charisma modifier as well. Sorcerer and Bard are also options as they stack with charisma, and you can never count out 2 levels into fighter for action surge. So there are plenty of options, but I would say take the War Domain Cleric or take the 2 fighter levels. Gear. I'm gonna do gear a bit different for this build, seeing as you would mainly be using the same gear from my best Paladin gear explained video, and maybe even some from the Griffith video like the Daredevil gloves, which makes your spells into melee for things like Eldritch Blast, or even quick spell gloves to use your spells as a bonus action. For that reason, I will only include a few pieces of gear as options for the Death Knight flavor. First, we have Reaper's Embrace. Obviously the best candidate for Death Knight armor with adorned skulls and just a badass look overall. This is 19 AC heavy armor that reduces all incoming damage by 2 and comes with a toggleable passive called Reaper's Rigidity. When activated, you can't be moved by any spell or action, an example Thunder Wave or Shove, but you have disadvantage on dexterity saving throws, which honestly isn't much of a big deal. We also get Howl of the Dead. This ability is similar to Dreadful Aspect, but instead you will let out a bone-chilling howl that numbs all nearby creatures in a 3-meter radius. Numb is a condition that halves the creature's movement speed, and the Death Knight will have advantage on attack rolls against those creatures. This can last for 3 turns, or can be removed by help or when hit by the Death Knight, so make your follow-up attack a huge one. This is obviously from Ketheric's corpse. Circle of Bones is an amulet that grants the Death Knight the Animate Dead spell, and with this he can raise an undead from the corpse of his enemy, and also grants an undead ward which buffs the undead within 6 meters around the Death Knight with resistance to bludgeoning, slashing, and piercing damage. Resistance halves the damage taken from these types, so this is extremely useful, especially for the second version of the Death Knight, which I will make a video if you guys are interested. For the Death Knight's amulet, I like Spectator Eyes or Strange Tendril Amulet. Spectator Eyes grants you 2 abilities, Ray of Fear and Wounding Ray, both of which can be used once per long rest. They aren't particularly powerful abilities in the late game, but have some pretty cool Death Knight flavor in my opinion. You get this from the Spectator and the Underdark. Ray of Fear frightens a target within 18 meters for 2 turns, and Wounding Ray deals 2d8 necrotic damage and will do half damage if the target passes a Constitution saving throw. Strange Tendril Amulet grants you Evert's Black Tentacles, which can be used once per long rest. This ability sprouts tentacles from the ground with a 6-meter radius, turning the area into difficult terrain while also attacking and smothering any who are caught inside. This will deal 3d6 bludgeoning damage per turn and debuff the affected creatures with disadvantage on attack rolls and dexterity saving throws, while giving you and your allies advantage on attacks against them. This can last for 10 turns and requires concentration. For rings, the Strange Conduit ring is decent because we will almost always be concentrating, which, while wearing this ring, will grant our attacks an additional 1d4 psychic damage. The other ring I like to wear is obviously the Ring of Exalted Marrow. This ring grants you 2 abilities, being Exhort the Risen and Ghoulish Touch, both recharging on long rest. Exhort the Risen is basically another version of the command spell, which this one works on undead. Ghoulish Touch I found to actually be useful at times, as you will deal a humble 2d6 necrotic damage, but also have a chance to paralyze the target for 2 turns, essentially giving you free reign to annihilate them. Last but not least, make sure to equip your Hellrider Longbow for a +3 bonus to initiative rolls, not worrying about the other perks. And with with that, you now have the most disgusting, vile, and overpowered Death Knight in the entire universe, capable of completely obliterating Baldur's Gate and whatever the absolute is. If you like this video, please make sure to subscribe as it helps the channel out tremendously, and I am constantly uploading Baldur's Gate 3 content, and in the future more CRPG D&D type content as well. Leave a comment down below and tell me what you liked or disliked about the build and what you might have done different. This is probably my favorite build to play as in the entire game, and I'm happy I finally got to share it with you all, so thank you for stopping by, and until next time, purge evil.
Yeah, crown in my palm, but I ain't put it on. Yeah, crown in my palm, but I ain't put it on. Yeah, crown in my palm, but I ain't put it on. Yeah, crown in my palm, but I ain't put it on. Yeah.